And now, Chapter 15 from The Last Boy on Earth, The Signal from Beyond. From the Journal of Brady Smith. It's late, and Kaylee is asleep upstairs under the cupola, under the watchful eyes of Vice President Hannibal Hamlin. My life has changed so much since my battle with Grendel. In a lot of ways, there are more questions now than answers. Kaylee insists on calling Grendel Dr. Grindel. I don't think she sees him as he really is. She sees a human person. I see a monster. And I know we're both looking at the same thing. She's pretty sharp, so I wonder how come she can't see things as they are. However, I don't think she's come through the abandonment without some changes, other than the obvious ones. I know for a fact that she can see at least twice as far as I can, even with binoculars. Her sight is amazingly sharp, like a falcon. She's also fascinated with the sound of water. I know that sounds really weird, but it's true. Today in the water tower, she was drawn to it. I had to literally pull her away from the glass, worried that she'd break it and fall into almost 2 million gallons. It was weird because I swear the water moved toward her, in ripples and waves. We took a drive down by the river to survey the damage down there, and the minute I stopped Rocinante, she rushed to the edge of the water and thrust her hands into it. She knelt like that for a couple of minutes, and I didn't think anything of it. I thought she was just cooling off. But when she didn't come back from the edge of the river, I went down to see what was up, and she was staring off into the distance like she wasn't looking at anything in particular, but something far, far away. I asked her, "What are you doing?" And she said in a weird, quiet voice, "Looking downriver, to the sea." I don't know, Brady. It's weird, like the water is a living thing, and it's kind of talking to me. It connects things. It's like a telescope. I can see through it to other places. That would have made any normal person think, wow, this girl is crazier than, add your own ideas here. But I know better. It's the abandonment. After we got away from the river, she was a lot better. Back to her old self. Her senses, her sight, hearing, and intuition, they're very sharp. How did she manage to avoid Grendel for so long in that hospital ward? I have two thoughts about that. First, she was on the maternity ward where all the babies around here are born. Heck, I was born there. We both were. I bet that all of the birthing and bringing life into the world has a power that still hangs on up there. Because he's so preoccupied with death, the power of life causes him pain and suffering. It's matter, and he's antimatter. It's life, and he's anti-life. He avoided the ward where so much living began and contained himself to the rest of the place where all of the death occurred. Secondly, I think she has a sixth sense. She knew when he was coming for her a minute or two before he did. That's precognition, classic ESP, extrasensory perception. It's like she could tap into his mind for a moment when she was in danger. She could easily move away from the area where he was going to show up. She could anticipate him. As for the city, it's quiet again. I think it's going to rain again tonight, so that should put an end to most of the few small fires left smoking here and there. I lost about 3/4 of my food and supply depots, but I'll survive. Thank God that the brewer side of the river was left untouched. After they had surveyed the damage to the city, it was time to provide Kaylee with what Brady called Survival 101. At Main Military Supply, the astronaut waited for them like a sentinel by the front door. Kaylee was about to cross the threshold into the store when his golden-gloved hand moved to halt her, and he asked through 1,000,000 miles of space, "Password?" Kaylee looked back at Brady and shot him a quizzical look. "Open sesame," said Brady, smiling. "Roger that," was the astronaut's reply, as he took the handle of the glass door and opened it. At first, she found nothing that she liked, but she made do with a few weapons that seemed to suit her. When Brady watched her face as she surveyed them, he was impressed and a little taken aback. She lingered over the knives, choosing 4 blades in all, plus a Japanese katana of her own that she slung over her back in an improvised sheath. And then she found the guns. Where Brady had an aversion to them because of the manner in which his own father had died, Cayley had no such scruples. Most of the rifles were locked and secured, nearly impossible for her to take down and examine. Brady watched with mixed emotions as she broke the glass display cases and reached in, removing and handling several handguns before finding the one that she liked the best. She eventually chose a .45 automatic. He was fascinated as he watched her break into the cash register and retrieve the keys to the gun locks on the pistols. It took her a few minutes, but by the time she was done, she had a shoulder holster, several boxes of ammunition, and a cleaning kit. Brady ventured. What are you going to do with that pistol? Oh, I don't know. Knock down a few walls? Oh, he answered. Hey, why don't you take a pistol? I know how to use one of these. I can show you. How do you know how to use a pistol? Easy. I'm a hunter. My dad taught me. Well, it's kind of a father-daughter bonding thing after the divorce, Get together and kill a living thing for the release of tension. Really, get a gun. They work well against monsters and wild dogs, and you can sleep with one under your pillow. Ah, he said, well, no, that's okay. I'd rather not use a gun. Why not? She inquired. You use a paintball gun. Yeah, he answered. It's not the gun so much as the bullets I have a problem with. Okay, why? Brady swallowed hard and fought with the idea. Should he tell her? He barely knew her, and to share something so close to his heart meant a lot to him. And still, he thought, if I don't tell her, she'll think I'm even weirder than she already does. A guy from Maine who doesn't like guns? He pictured a stereotyped hunter standing at the gun shop, shaking his head, saying under his breath, something wrong with that boy. My dad was a hunter, too. He died in a hunting accident. He was shot and killed. It put me off the idea of guns, he explained. That was odd. She felt it more deeply than she usually did. Tears rapidly rose to her eyes, and she felt her heart quicken. Was he sending something to her? Was she receiving something from him? Is it okay with you if I have a gun? She asked simply. Brady shrugged nonchalantly. I guess. Just be careful where you point it and don't expect me to use it. Oh, I won't. It's just that it's a crazy world out there now, and until I know that Dr. Grindle is going to leave us alone, I'll sleep better at night with this. By the time they returned to the library for their evening meal, they had also acquired another valuable item, another four-wheeler. Brady had a list of available recreational vehicles, from dirt bikes to other motorhomes that he had discovered in his travels, but for Cayley, he went directly to the dealer on Wilson Street. He chose a display model, checked out all the fluid levels, and took 3 extra spark plugs and a parcel of filters and brake pads from the service department for future use. Cayley was visibly pleased with the choice. She would have preferred a car, having just received her license last fall, but she understood how a car would limit her access to many kinds of places. Here, Brady said, handing her a helmet. What do I want with that? She asked. Want to keep your brain in your skull? Real women don't wear helmets, she said. I didn't survive the plague, so I could be careful now. Brady looked at her in surprise. Look, if you get in an accident on this thing, I'm going to be your doctor. I'm 14 years old. I think of myself as a pretty smart guy, but I'm no brain surgeon. He held the helmet with outstretched hands, looking at her patronizingly. She took it from him grudgingly. Just give me the damned helmet. Cayley was in the small kitchen in the basement, helping Brady make their evening meal of canned beef stew, homemade biscuits in the oven, and canned carrots, followed by peaches and heavy syrup. She would have preferred a Big Mac, but those days were gone. I'm going to go check out the generator. I have to write in the maintenance log. It helps me remember to keep the fluid stopped. As he checked the gauges and fluid levels, Brady watched as Hugin arrived from his daily ramblings. He called to the bird. The great satin-feathered raven descended from the power line in front of the library and croaked a greeting. Brady produced some beef jerky from his pocket and put them on the ground next to the raven. He was still amazed at how the bird didn't shy away from him. Deep down, he wanted to speak with him. Hugin, can you understand me? The bird looked up and croaked. Ragnarok. There was that one word, Ragnarok, the end of things, the fall of the gods and rise of the frost giants from Norse mythology. But what did it mean? Was the bird reminding him of the state of things on Earth, or was it just a random sound? I don't understand you, but I'm trying. I think you understand me, so help me out. I'm going to ask you a question, and you answer, so I can get it, okay? Ragnarok, answered Hugin. Okay, I need to know if you've seen any were-dogs in the city since the fire. The bird's head began to bob up and down like someone wiggling a water hose in an odd serpentine rhythm, and he croaked, Ragnarok. Brady watched, and a small light bulb could have appeared over his head when he realized that he understood the raven's response. That's a yes, isn't it? The bird settled back to giving its attention to the beef jerky. Well, that was something, thought Brady. Hugin, buddy, are there any more of them out there than before? Is the pack growing? The bird took his time, consuming the entire piece before replying, Ragnarok. The accented first syllable means yes, thought Brady. He would ask him a question that he thought would have a negative answer to check. Hugin, do you like crows? Ragnarok, was his reply, as he spoke and walked back and forth like a Wild West gunfighter with heavy holsters at his hips. Success, thought Brady. At least he could elicit yes and no answers from the bird, and that could help him immensely. Hugin croaked and pecked at the ground assertively. Oh, sorry, answered Brady. I forgot. Here's another, he said as he threw the final bit of beef jerky to the ground in front of the bird. He pondered why Hugin had chosen him. He knew that without him, he would probably never have rescued Kaylee in time. He may never have survived at all. He said goodbye as Hugin took to the sky again and went off on his nightly flight. Kaylee had set the table, and eating was something that they both had taken for granted in the world before the abandonment, but now it took on a very serious significance bordering on the spiritual. It meant another day, another chance. It was purposeful and something they paid more attention to than they ever did before. It was a time to just talk. How did you make friends with that raven? She asked casually as they ate. I didn't. He made friends with me. Hugin helps me. I follow him on his flights sometimes. He knows where things are. Don't you think that's kind of strange? Yeah, there's all kinds of strange out there right now, answered Brady. Yeah, I guess there is. When darkness came that night, the empty spaces in the library seemed to expand to infinite proportions. Just as anyone in a totally lightless room might only know the boundaries of his prison by the sense of touch alone, so it was for Kaylee and Brady. When the generators were switched off, their light was isolated and small. Kaylee used a battery-powered lantern to examine the contents of the supplies that Brady had so assiduously stacked in piles all over the main floor. She wondered at Brady's planning skills and the reasons he might have for considering many of the items he chose to save and treasure. Here there was a pack of ballpoint pens, there a set of coffee cups, a brass yardstick, a violin in a case, a half-full plastic container of red licorice whips. There were piles of things she saw no rhyme or reason for keeping, but she let them pass as the brainchildren of Brady's imagination. He was good company. She could follow his reasoning with the cases of ropes, bungee cords, tools, foodstuffs, blankets, first aid supplies, and the like. But if Brady thought to group these essentials with the likes of a paint set or a case of yarn, who was she to question him? Wading through the piles of supplies, she found the small brown portable world band radio. She knew enough about world band radio to understand that it essentially worked the same as other radios, except that you could hear stations from all over the world, especially at night when the Earth's ionosphere lowered. She switched it on. There was no sound at all. Brady, where do you keep the batteries? She called. In the gray plastic tub clearly marked batteries. Why? She didn't want to tell him that she just wanted to try, even though it was a foolish notion, to see if anyone was broadcasting. Brady rounded the corner with his headlamp on high and saw what she had in her hand. Oh, that. You don't need batteries. It's hand-powered. See the crank? There's a little generator inside hooked to a rechargeable battery. Just crank it for a minute or two and you got about 40 minutes of power. There's a little lamp on the front too. Go ahead, give it a crank. She flipped the crank from the side, put the radio on a library table, and began to turn it. She counted to 300 and stopped. When she flipped the switch, the radio sent static roaring through the cavernous darkness of the room. Brady had forgotten about the radio. He'd tried it every day for 2 weeks, and there was nothing, but he had to see for himself, and he knew Kaylee would need to do the same. He sat down next to her, and they both stared at it. He said, "I can already tell you, you'll find nothing on the air locally. Try the World Band. There are a few different radio bands to choose from. Now be careful, it's really touchy, see? If you go through the bands really, really slowly, you might catch some sounds. But all I ever got were some automated signals from some kind of code that was way too fast for me to decipher. I think those are airports broadcasting some kind of homing signal. All automated, though, too regular to be humans sending out that kind of speed. There, that's right. Turning the tuning knob really slowly," he said encouragingly. For that moment, they were both entirely engaged in the sound of static that erupted, hissed, and whispered from the small speaker in front of them. Kaylee turned the knob more slowly than the minute hand on a clock might creep from minute to minute. They didn't speak or make eye contact. Both of them stared intently at the position of the needle on the frequency bar. Minute by minute they listened, telling themselves not to expect anything. Kaylee could have sworn she heard a voice from the ether saying, "We're out here. Keep looking." They turned the knob for over 40 minutes in near total silence before it was time to crank it again, the static fading away quickly as the last vestige of electricity in the rechargeable battery was spent. Kaylee put the radio on the table and began to crank the generator handle. Their hearts were sinking as they realized that they had just wasted time on a hopeless quest that would never answer their anticipation. Kaylee was cranking the handle carelessly, and the radio slipped from her grip, crashing to the floor. Brady hurried to pick it up, and as he did, his fingers slipped on the dial. And then the words from a world away began speaking from the edge of the ionosphere. The radio sang forth a stream of words. They didn't recognize the language at first, but they listened all the more intently as the signal kept fading and growing in strength. Brady quickly found a pen and wrote down the exact frequency on the small pad he always carried in his leg pocket, wire-bound at the top with a zebra gel ballpoint pen. "What language is it?" asked Brady. "Do you recognize it?" Kaylee held up her hand, gesturing him to be silent. She listened for another minute or so, and then she said, "Russian? No, Ukrainian. They said Ukraine a few times." The woman continued speaking for several moments with brief interruptions from large bursts of static as the signal continued its erratic behavior, and then a moment of silence that lasted all of 20 seconds that might have been an hour in the minds of the two listeners. The voice from beyond began to speak in heavily accented English. "This is Radio Ukraine International broadcasting on band 41 at 7440 megahertz to North America, coming to you from the Lviv Krajny transmitter in the heart of Ukraine. This is Tatiana Savacheva calling to all people in North America who might be listening to this broadcast. We are, as far as we can determine, the only remaining broadcaster in the world with full power to transmit a signal. We are broadcasting for only brief periods of time to save on fuel. Our diesel generators have enough fuel to continue to transmit and receive on limited basis for 3 or 4 months, we estimate." Brady and Kaylee were staring at the little lighted dial, and he could see she was rapt with attention. Tatiana Savacheva continued, "Here is the situation as we understand it. The world has suffered a mass extinction event in the form of a viral pandemic of unknown origin. If you are listening to this, you should consider yourself one of the few people left on Earth. Governments have all fallen, including our own Ukrainian government. It is only because there is no one left to govern. The people of Earth are nearly gone. This is why we are broadcasting. We are acting as a clearinghouse of information, and we want to hear from you. Details of how to transmit a signal to us over the shortwave radio will follow. For your information, we have heard from small groups of people all over the world. There are currently groups of surviving people in Australia, China, Japan, Argentina, Mexico, islands in the Pacific, Svalbard, and the east and west coasts of the United States and Canada. None of these groups are very large, with 10 to 15 people in the largest groups. Some of these contacts are only single people. We know that there are more of you out there, so we will continue to broadcast on this frequency every day at this time, and we will be listening for your signal. Here are the current groups and their frequencies if you wish to contact them. You will need access to a world band radio, and if you do not know how to use a ham radio transmitter, you should seek out the local library and find a book that explains how to do so. Many people have receivers like the ones you are using right now, but transmitters are less common. You will need to find one that also has a source of power you can use to contact these people. The speaker began to list the cities and frequencies at which the people living there could be contacted. Canberra, Australia, Christchurch, New Zealand, Hong Kong, China, and the list continued, including a contact in Vancouver, British Columbia, and another in Baja, California. The closest one to Brady and Kaylee was Washington, D.C. For each site, she listed the number of people in the group and finished the list by giving them the frequency they could use to contact her. By the time she was done speaking, she had listed 15 different cities scattered across the planet with survivors like them. Brady had written all of them on his pad. Radio Ukraine urges anyone who can hear the signal to tune in every day at this time to hear updates. The situation is troubling for us all. We are all that remains of almost 7 billion people. If humanity is going to survive, we must each of us consider that we are now family. There are no countries, borders, or wars. If you have already not done so, seek protection from wild animals, which are now growing more bold. Find medical supplies, antibiotics, and as much food and clean water as you can. Do not drink unpurified water unless you live in the country, as city water supplies will probably be poisoned with sewage. We are now in summer in the northern hemisphere, but prepare for winter weather now by securing some method to stay warm. You can eat canned food safely for up to 5 years or more. We are now readying to sign off for the day. Please keep your radio tuned to this frequency and tune in tomorrow at this time for another update. Repeat, please find a world band radio transmitter and contact us as soon as possible. If we can contact each other, we will not have to be alone. This is Tatiana Savacheva, speaking for the 4 technicians at Radio Ukraine International. Be safe. Good night. Kaylee put the radio gently down on the table and looked at Brady, a smile widening on her face, her eyes as wide as $50, tears beginning to form. Wordlessly, she threw herself at him, grappling onto him with a hug that knocked his breath away. They both screamed with excitement and unity. It was a shout that rattled rafters and rang up through the heavens. It awoke the minions of the lost and echoed down long hallways where dwelled those used to long silences. Grendel heard it, and it dug into him like a dagger of the mind. He felt the change in both of them. For some reason the monster did not understand. The girl was now twice as strong as she had previously been. Somehow she had found and fed upon some food of power. She had found her hope, and with it he knew she would be a juggernaut. End of chapter.